Hi, I'm Haille, the Habitat Restoration Manager with the Galveston Bay Foundation, and I'm here today to tell you a little bit about oysters and why they're so important to the Galveston Bay estuary. So first of all, what is an oyster? Well, I have one here to show you today. This little guy is an eastern oyster, which is native to our Galveston Bay system. And it's called a bivalve mollusk because it has two halves of a shell, or two valves, that come together to encase and protect the ooey gooey little animal that lives inside and that I know many of us enjoy eating. But they're also really important to the ecosystem because not only do oysters provide habitat for other species, they also filter the water and make it cleaner and clearer for all of us to enjoy. And the way they do that is through their filter feeding ability. So in order to get food, an oyster like this will actually open its shell a little bit and suck in the water over its gills to pull out phytoplankton or algae, and that's its diet. But while doing that, it'll also pull out particulate matter and even some nutrients from the water that might otherwise cause pollution or algae blooms, and therefore it helps to keep our waters cleaner and clearer. Now, one adult oyster can filter 50 gallons in a day. So we've got a little video prepared for you that will show you just how quickly these oysters can filter the water and make it cleaner and clearer for all of us to enjoy. In addition to being great filtration systems for the bay, oysters are also a very important habitat for a variety of fish species, shrimp, crab, and many other species that live in Galveston Bay. And this is because oysters form reef structures. So rather than just having one oyster alone, they actually attach to one another and grow in these clusters that create all sorts of nooks and crannies in which fish and shrimp and all sorts of critters love to hide. Now, the way that this happens is due to the way that oysters spawn. They're called dispersal spawners. And so the larvae actually ends up free floating in the bay until about 2 weeks old, when it starts to descend to the bottom in search of something hard to attach to. Now, oysters can attach to just about anything: rocks, wood, old posts, but they especially like to attach to other oyster shells. So at the Galveston Bay Foundation, we started an oyster shell recycling program back in 2011 to help return these oyster shells to the bay. Because whenever you go to a restaurant and you have a delicious meal of oysters, where do you think those shells go? They end up in the trash with all of that restaurant's waste and eventually get sent to the landfill. Well, instead, the Galveston Bay Foundation works with local restaurant partners to supply recycling receptacles and pickups weekly to collect their shells. We then quarantine those shells, and then those shells are returned to Galveston Bay to create new oyster habitat and allow for those oysters to attach and begin to grow into the reefs that we know and love here in Galveston Bay. I'm here at our Sweetwater Preserve on Galveston Island, and behind me is Sweetwater Lake. This is actually a tidal water body that connects into West Galveston Bay. And unfortunately, we've been seeing erosion along the shoreline for many years. So in order to halt that erosion and also help restore oyster reefs in this water body, we work with amazing volunteers who spend their Saturdays with us bagging this recycled oyster shell in aquaculture mesh to help contain it, and then actually taking that shell out into the water and placing it in a pyramid formation to build what we call a breakwater or wave break. And what that does, it actually stops that wave energy as it encroaches along the shoreline, and sediment drops out behind it, eventually building up enough sediment to help reduce the erosion. And over time, those oyster shells will also attract baby oysters and become completely encrusted, creating a hard wave break structure that's also natural to the environment. And we're also in the process of planting marsh grass behind that oyster shell breakwater to increase the nursery habitat here in Sweetwater Lake. Over the last 5 years, we've been working with university partners to research this project in Sweetwater Lake and determine the success of our oyster reef restoration and shoreline protection. And we're excited to announce some preliminary data results showing that we have over 80 live oysters in each one of these shell bags that goes into Sweetwater Lake. That means we have over 900,000 new oysters potentially recruiting out here in this bay. And if you remember, one adult oyster can filter 50 gallons of water, so you can imagine what this mass number of oysters will do for this small bay system.